Hello, it's Jacek Bartosiak here. Welcome to Strategy and Future. Today, my guests are again Assaf and Omer Dank from Israel, from Tel Aviv University, from the Center of dealing with the air power projection, air defense, everything related to air power, both in strategic and operational terms. Hello, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For those of you who watched the previous session with my guests, I sort of remind you that we ran out of time, so to speak, and we didn't even start highlighting the presentation that the gentleman had prepared to show the evolution in the air battle, in the trajectory where the air warfare could take us. So why don't we just get started with the presentation, Assaf?
Let's start.
Okay, it's all visible.
Do you see it on full screen?
Yes, full screen now. Perfect.
That's good. Well, my presentation is dealing with what's going on with the air defense. What are the trends that we see in recent years and probably we'll see in the next following years, and what should be done about it. The point of view that I take is the Israeli point of view, both military capabilities as well as the civil aviation. Still, I believe that the ideas, the terms, the analysis might be interesting for European ears as well, and mainly in Polish ears that I believe share some of the concerns that Israel has these years. At the beginning, I'll start with the role of air power. During the last several decades, air power became a major pillar in the Western way of looking at military issues, at warfare, etc. The role of air forces doesn't really matter whether it is aircrafts, helicopters, and recently UAVs. It's very important in the Western point of view. They have a tremendous effect in the concept of operations on the adversaries, on all aspects, reconnaissance, strikes, transportation, etc. And what we see, as I believe, in recent years is several trends that put these air components under threat. And I believe force us to rethink about how we deal with the adversaries' air defense.
Very interesting. So it seems counterintuitive into what generally the public thinks, that it's the attack and the offense that has an upper hand.
I think that, again, look, in the past, there were several unpleasant incidents. Israel faced some of them about 50 years ago, where the air defense had the upper hand. And Israel, I think we talked about it in our last conversation, Israel developed a very capable air force that can deal with the other side air defense very good, quickly, decisively, etc. And what we see recently are trends that undermine or might undermine these capabilities, these concept of operations.
Yeah.
So I start with what has changed. And I will talk about two different types of changes. The first will be the doctrinal change. Some of the doctrines are written, some of them I assume that they exist because I see what is how the air defense is being operated. in the last decade, or last 2 decades. The second type of changes will be the technical changes or the level of capabilities of air defense. And I believe that together, the doctrinal change and the change in capabilities will help me to describe what are we going to face in the future and how it might affect the capabilities of confronting air defense. And this will bring me to the bottom line of what steps should be taken. And again, I'll talk about the Israeli point of view for confronting the air defense in the future. I must put a little disclaimer. I don't describe the Israeli formal point of view. What I describe is our point of view, Omer and me, or the center of our center point of view. We are on the way to persuade people in the air defense, in the Air Force, Israeli Air Force, that these changes are occurring and there are things that should be done for confronting them better in the future. Okay, so I hope that no one takes me as a
fair enough
of the Israeli Air Force.
Disclaimer acknowledged. People will remember. Yeah, Assaf, all clear.
Okay. Look, in the last 20 years, the idea of A2AD or anti-access area denial concept was developed in the West to describe, at the beginning, the Chinese way of creating their air defense. The beginning, I think, was in the Taiwan crisis, Taiwan Straits crisis in the middle of the 90s. These days, we see another crisis in the same area.
Yeah.
What happened in the middle of the 90s that China threatened Taiwan, and all the American had to do was to put their ships in the straits. And actually, the Chinese could do very little to the capable power of the American in the naval Navy of the US in the straits.
Yeah.
And for several years, the Chinese developed what can be described as a bubble that will help them conduct their operations in the area of China, near its borders, without the threat of US interference that is supposed to confront the aggression of the Chinese, both in land, such as in the Himalaya, and in sea, such as in the area of Taiwan or the South Chinese Sea. And the tools were very diverse. There were tools of long-range reconnaissance and long-range anti-aircraft missiles and long-range surface-to-surface missiles, and weapons against the submarines and against air carriers, etc. All kinds of capabilities that were meant first to prevent the US projecting its power to the area by deterring them from enter the area of several thousand kilometers and to be able to strike them, whether they are on ships or on islands like in Guam, for example. And to capabilities what they were meant to prevent the air power to operate freely above the battlefield or above China. This means electronic warfare and SAMs, etc.
Yeah.
After the idea was developed for describing the Chinese force buildup, it was used to describe the Russian force buildup. For example, what was called the bubble in Kaliningrad with the S-400 and the long-range surface-to-surface missiles, etc. And later on, to describe the way the Iranian and Algerian are used in air defense, and even paramilitary, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is what the basic idea. I think that even though the idea of A2AD was very precise in describing what's going on in China, it was not really suitable for other arenas.
Mm-hmm.
For example, look at Russia. On the right, you can see the map that people like to put in a presentation or in articles to show the range of anti-aircraft missiles such as S-400 and surface-to-surface missiles from Kaliningrad area. But when you check the capabilities in details, you see, for example, that in the low altitude where aircraft are traveling or where surface-to-surface cruise missiles are operating, the ranges of the air defenses are much smaller. There was a very interesting article called Bursting the Bubble that was written several years ago, which analyzed this specific point of view.
Yeah, I think I remember this interesting article.
Yeah.
I agree.
And when we look at the real capabilities of Russia, as were presented in Ukraine, you see that the capabilities of striking from distance elements such as surface-to-air missiles or radars or bases of Air Force bases, such as the one in this image, you see that the capabilities were very low. They couldn't use their weapons to decisively destroy the air defense capabilities of Ukraine. The numbers, the precision, the final effect of the weapons were not something that can be described as the striking element that helped the A2AD win. And I believe that what was described as the Russian A2AD wasn't exactly what we faced in reality. When you look on other places, I put only the example of Iran here on the map on the left. The basic idea of A2AD in China was...
Assaf, if I may. If we were to draw lessons from what Russians showed in Ukraine, especially in Poland, when we are about to shape and design the air force structure. So, and apparently the decisions that were made was that the aerial platforms are more survivable than we thought, and we can also buy cheaper aircraft from South Korea that that are not a high-end aircraft but are still doing a good job in close combat support. Yeah. So this the observation that and lesson that you would draw from the fact that the Russians are so poor in this air defense, or else?
Well, I talked only on one part of the A2AD doctrine, mainly on the first A2, the anti-access, the capability of preventing the other side from being able to send its air power to the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that I don't think that the Russian showed a very good capability in destroying Air Force bases and destroying air defense assets. It doesn't mean that from force protection in the battlefield, the shorter range surface-to-air missiles, the electronic warfare in the close combat, I didn't mean that they don't have the capabilities of denying an effective use of air power in the battlefield. What I meant here is that the idea that they can deny the access to the battlefield, which was a very important part of the A2AD, is something that the Russians probably don't have. What it means for, in Polish eyes, if I put it in the bottom lines, I think that you can use air power from the rear without thinking that everything might be destroyed on the first hour. It doesn't mean that you can send your aircraft into the kill zone of SAM batteries and think that they won't do anything. They will be effective in the battlefield. They won't be effective in long distances. I think this is the main idea. I look at the size of Poland. I believe that in the western parts, the Air Force will be able to operate without the fear of total destruction.
So does it mean, for example, Assaf, that we should start thinking about, you know, as we talked before, air dominance, air superiority fighter that could take off in the western part of Poland, has a very long range to air, so that we, you know, expel, chase off from our skies all enemy fighters loitering over Polish heads or something like that? Could we draw such a lesson that this is at least conceivable to think about it?
I think it's conceivable. The good question will be whether this is the best way for Polish defense, or, for example, using surface-to-air missiles batteries will be more effective or cheaper or easier to deploy than, say, high-end interceptors.
I understand.
It's another question. I didn't deal with this question. How you, what's the best way for you to develop air defense capabilities? What I try to present here is how the air power on the other side should see the air defense on the other side, not on its own side.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay? I think it's a very interesting discussion. And what's the best way for Poland to develop an effective air defense?
Okay.
When I look at, I try to draw conclusions from what's going on in Ukraine until now, I believe that surface assets like SAM batteries and radars are more effective than aircrafts. Okay.
I understand, reinforced by massive use of UAVs, right? That loiter over.
Yeah, but the UAVs are not for this mission, but for
not for defense. They are for the defense on the ground. The UAVs, not defense in the air.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Another trend that we see in our area in the Middle East, it's I don't think it's much of concern in Poland, but it might be seen in the future. It's the rise of hybrid enemies, paramilitary. They don't use the symmetric air defense doctrines, but rather what is usually named as asymmetric. And the goal in this doctrine is not to shoot down many aircrafts or shoot down many missiles, but to create the image of a threat and to deter the air power on the other side from striking. It's not about shooting down many aircrafts, it's about a symbolic success. For example, on the image on the left, you see the remains of F-117 that was shot down in Serbia, 1999.
Yeah.
The Serbs didn't shoot down many Western aircrafts, but this image was important more than the shooting down of the one specific aircraft. And look at the image on the other side is an image of a missile that was used in Yemen by the Houthis to shoot down UAVs of the coalition of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But this image on the right was taken, at least assumed to be taken in Iraq by the pro-Iranian militias there, which means that they even don't need to shoot down any aircraft. All they try to do is to create an image of having a capability of shooting down aircrafts. This is a totally different doctrine. And one of the main concept of operations is the ambush mode in this doctrine. It means that it's better to stay alive with your air defense assets than shooting down other aircrafts. Therefore, you'll expose for a minimum period of time, several minutes, probably someone else will tell you, well, look, there's another aircraft, aircrafts are coming. You should take out your SA-8 or SA-22, find, track, shoot, and hide. And if you don't succeed, never mind. The main idea is to survive and to create a threat that is continuous, even though it's not too effective. I believe that what we see in Ukraine in the last several months is exactly this. The aircrafts are, for example, Russian aircrafts are not operating over Ukraine, not because they fall every flight. They do not. The Ukrainians managed to take their air defense assets and to make them survive for a long period of time. And sometimes they succeed in shooting down Russian aircrafts. But the main concept is to be there and not
disruption. The main is disruption.
Yeah, and inflict fear, inflict calculus.
Yes. Yeah, and
especially that attrition in the Air Force is really cascading quickly, right? From sorties.
Yes, because there is big and expensive platforms and special crew, so you can't lose them all quickly.
Yeah.
And when I look now, I try to put it on what I can describe to myself as Polish eyes. We see how the Russian Air Force is takes into consideration this use of asymmetric air defense, and it really affects. The attrition was higher at the beginning, but after several days, the attrition is very low. Still, they prefer shooting missiles from long ranges, missiles that many times do not hit precisely, and not taking their aircraft strikers and fly to the west of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay. The last doctrine that I want to describe here is the use of air defense for coercion. This is something that we've seen in our arena, but in the Middle East, but can be seen elsewhere as well. For example, I'll put here on the right the map of, you can see this is Israel, Lebanon, this is Syria, and in the middle, the deployment of S-400 by the Russians. This SAM battery covers a wide area in the east of the Mediterranean. I believe it's not only to protect their forces in Syria. I believe that a major consideration for them was to push military aircraft from this area, mainly NATO, American, maybe Israelis. And this battery is there to deter not to shoot down.
And this is what complicated your operational planning in Israel as well?
Look, I think that until now, Israel is managing to operate, even though there are Russian STEM batteries, and there is some level of cooperation or at least deconfliction, not cooperation, that was published on the press. But I think that
let's be more precise in deconflicting. Simply, you need to consult with the Russians to avoid unintended consequences of flyovers or something. Yes, how you fly.
It's not about getting permission. It's about telling the Russians, look, what you see here are now Israeli aircrafts. They don't intend to harm Russians in Syria. They only move inside to strike Hezbollah targets, for example.
Mm-hmm.
This is the level of the confliction. It's not cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about sharing the same strategy, for example. Okay, this is only one example. The Russian forces are deployed in Libya, short-range SAMs, but advanced aircrafts. And there are talkings about Russian deployment in the Red Sea,
mm-hmm.
in Sudan, probably in the following years. Again, these deployments can look the same. Several high-end aircrafts, several STEM batteries, not something that is meant to be able to confront in a high-intensity conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for war. It's for peacetime. It's for operating under the threshold of escalation. It's part of the use of soft power tools. The picture in the middle is a Russian interceptor flying very close to a US reconnaissance aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in the Black Sea several years ago. It's not, there is no intention of the Russians to shoot down this aircraft. They want only to press a little bit more and to coerce the other side and not to fly over areas that the Russians don't think that they should fly
mm-hmm.
over there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can reach even shooting down. For example, on the image on the left was the American Global Hawk, which was shot down by Iranian STEM battery in the Gulf, in Persian Gulf. I don't think that the Iranian will take the risk to shoot down a manned American aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
But to shoot down a UAV is something that under the threshold of escalation, at least in their eyes.
Okay, so it's about scalable conflict, where on the escalation ladder you can manipulate to contain the conflict within both mutually acceptable ranges, so that you can still impose your will or have this, as Schelling called, forced negotiations by showing your capabilities, but without all risk full confrontation that may end up with the demolition of the whole country or something. I understand. This is the feature of the modern wars, by the way. I know this, and even at Strategy and Future, we sort of think that even if there is a world war coming, or maybe it even started like 2 weeks ago a week ago with a visit of Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan, it is scalable and it differs much from the previous systemic wars of the Napoleonic era, First World War, Second World War, because you have the thermonuclear weapons on the edge of the escalation ladder, and you don't want to go there, and still you want to compel your enemy to do something by force. Yeah, so it's a scalable thing, and you understand it very well in the air force, in the air battle.
Yeah, and I think that in this concept, air defense is only one part of conquering the sky. You can use air defense, which means surface-to-air missiles, radar, aircraft, etc. But you can use other tools that the Russians are using very often. Diplomacy, press, cyber. Look how the Russians reacted when Turkey shot down Russian aircraft over Syria. They didn't go to confrontation with the Turkish Air Force. They attacked in cyber.
And they denied the tourists. So they make it for the money.
Okay, and here the air defense is assets are used as a part of a much larger campaign.
Yeah.
Okay, I move on. I'll talk a little bit about several technological trends. I'll try not to speak, on too much about technology, unless Jacek, you'll ask me to go in deeper, but mainly to talk about the meaning of the changes. Mm-hmm. The first trend is having a better aerial picture. In the past, most of the aerial picture was created by using radars, short-range radars, long-range radars. What we see in the last 2 decades is not something new, but in the idea, but they are new in capabilities and in the scale that they are. First is the sensor for detecting low observables. If the Americans were developing aircrafts and UAVs with low RCS, on the other side, they developed a sensor that can detect, which means more SIGINT and radars which operate in low frequency and using electro-optics, etc. Mm-hmm. All the assets that can detect something that has low radar cross-section. The second part of the trend is using computer and network to integrate a picture, which means that in the past, if you couldn't see in the radar a good track, so several blips, one after the other, you couldn't tell that there was aircraft. You had points, but you couldn't draw a line. The computer network lets you combine very dispersed points. And maybe every point was detected by a different sensor. But when you put them together, you can see the lines between the dots and understand that there is something going on. Actually, you can see things that technically were seen in the past, but rise to the level of understanding that.
This has something to do with the artificial intelligence capabilities and the fusion of information.
I think that even before that, you don't need AI. Of course, it can help you, but the main process here is the computer network. Mm-hmm. What algorithm you use, even if you use a mental algorithm of an operator, it can be enough sometimes. Mm-hmm. And what is also being done using this network is dispersing this picture, which means that every end in the net, every aircraft, every battery, every radar operator can get the full picture, or the picture that it needs. It means that, to sum up, the air defense can see better, can create a better picture, and can disperse this picture, aerial picture, in real time to the components of the air defense network. Mm-hmm. That's the first. Second trend is the development in surface-to-air missiles. They get lower ranges, longer ranges all the time. Mm-hmm. You see the family of SA-6, SA-11, SA-17, SA-70, M3 Viking. The ranges are increasing for SA-10, SA-20, SA-20D, etc. The second part of this trend is using computer for countermeasures and to confront the electronic warfare, which was used by aircrafts for protection. The use of computers lets you be much more agile, much more diverse, and it is much harder to understand what are these techniques and to confront them. The third is the diversity of homing techniques. In the past, most of the surface-to-air missiles were using either for homing, either semi-active head or were signaled from the battery and they got directions how to move and find the aircrafts. They didn't have homing devices on board. What we see in recent years is diversity of homing techniques, active radars, semi-active radars, passive radars, combining with electro-optic devices. All these make the surface-to-air missiles much more effective, and the protection that is required for the aircraft is much harder to be created. Mm-hmm. And finally, the idea of energy weapons, mainly lasers, but not only. It's not something that will be very popular in the next few years. I heard that in Ukraine, the Russian said that they will send such a weapon, laser, to Ukraine. I didn't hear about any success of this project in the battlefield. Mm-hmm. If you know something else, it will be very interesting.
No, I don't. I don't, but I have heard the rumors that the Israelis have, might be having such capabilities soon, or are already having.
I think that the main the developments that I know is in Israel and in the US. I hope that for many years as we can, this success will be only on one side, of course. There are changes in the interceptors in aircrafts used to intercept other aircrafts. Recently, there was the arrival of fifth generation aircrafts. Actually, I know only about 2 countries that managed to develop such an aircraft, the US and China. As far as I understand, in Russia, the development did not succeed, and the Sukhoi 57 didn't become maybe it is operational only in a small scale, but they decided not to go into full production. This is one trend, which is actually become more popular these years. The next is the development of a 6th generation concept, which talk about mainly about the combining of manned and unmanned aircrafts.
Loyal wingman, right? Concept, sort of.
Some of them are described as loyal wingmen, mainly in the American CONOPS, but in Europe they have other concepts that are not exactly what the Americans see as a loyal wingman. And the needs are different. So the American requirements is something that can fly for 1,000 miles, because you need to strike in long distances. When you look about the needs of Poland, for example, Poland doesn't need a UAV that flies to 1,000 miles. It needs a much closer ranges. But I think that the major trend that we'll see in the next few years is the improvement of 4th generation aircrafts into the standard of 5th generation without the element of the low RCS. I mean that the sensors electronic warfare and communication in fourth-generation aircraft can be, probably will be similar to what we see in fifth generation. They'll be highly capable in interception, of aircraft, in detection of aircrafts, in shooting them down, and they'll use electronic warfare as something that might overcome the lack of low RCS. And finally, there were trends in the electronic warfare and cyber. When we look at the US grand plan in the last several decades, they decide to use GPS. They used SATCOM for assisting them to operate globally, and they used computers very everywhere, actually. Every one of these three components is facing now an answer from the other side. The GPS, see its opposition on GNSS jamming. The SATCOM sees its opponent in the jamming of SATCOM. It's something which is not too difficult. And the net-centric warfare sees its opponent in the cyber attack on the other side. Actually, all these parts are very important when you talk about air defense. You use GNSS jamming to prevent the capability to strike your assets. You use the SATCOM jamming for preventing aircrafts and missiles get the picture that they need, or the instruction that they need. And when you try to use a net-centric warfare in striking, you face the cyber, and maybe cyber over RF in the next years. These are the main technology trends when I put them in a very high-level words. Better picture, better surface-to-air missiles, better interceptors, and better electronic warfare. So, and now I get to the last part of the presentation. What does it mean? And here I'm talking mainly on the Israeli point of view. Mm-hmm. First, I think that Israel will find itself in a continuous campaign for the freedom of flight over Israel, not only over other countries, because the ranges of the air defense actually make it applicable for all Israel. Look at the range of S-400. This is from long distance, from North Syria. It covers half of Israel. If you put them in southern Syria, they'll cover all Israel. And these capabilities might be used for the coercion of Israeli military use of aircrafts. Because if you can threat all the Israeli airspace, you can use this tool in the strategic, for changing the strategic balance, or preventing Israel from operating freely over its own area. What it means for Israel, if I look at things that Israel should develop. First, I think that the Israeli Air Force should be able to confront what I call soft tools. It's not too hard, too difficult to shoot down or to strike this S-400 battery. If the Israeli Air Force get, for example, a command to destroy it, it will. But in routine, you don't do it. You have to live alongside it. you can't shoot everyone that makes you trouble.
That threatens you, that threatens you, or it's a threat, it's a pending threat or future threat. Yeah, you can't eliminate them up front, right? For political reasons also.
For example, if they on the other side use electronic warfare and jam your communication, it's not conceivable to strike him just because he used electronic warfare.
Yeah,
you should be able to use these soft tools first to be able to resist this the effect of these soft tools. For example, if the other side try to jam you, it's better that your systems will not be jammed. But moreover, you should be able to conduct a routine campaign using the tools of threatening, of diplomacy, of cyber, everything that is not just shooting the other side down.
Yeah.
I believe that Russians are a good example for the Air Force that is capable of manipulating these tools very efficiently. And again, remember the incident with Turkey. They could shut down several Turkish aircraft or to strike Turkish Air Force bases. They did not. And they achieved the same success. Okay? The Turkish didn't make them any trouble anymore in northern Syria. They didn't have to shoot down anyone. The second implication is the potential use of terror against civil aviation. Well, we've seen use of air defense assets against civil aviation in the past. Mainly the use of manpads, man-portable air defense, which are small missiles to the range of 2, 3, 5 kilometers. That's all. I think that all
Russians took down some aircraft, so it's not only manpads.
Yeah,
Russian in Ukraine, the Malaysian plane was shot down with Russian air defense system.
Yeah.
I agree. But I think that these manpads are very common in all militias, all terror groups. It's not hard to get them, but the range is limited. When you look about new weapons, such as the missile that is it's called, I believe, 358, the one that is used in Yemen, the one that the militias in Iraq claim to get. The ranges are tens of kilometers. It means that if this element is put close to the Israeli border, it threatens a large part of Israel. It threatens the aerial connection, Israel and the world. And it gives the terror groups or the paramilitary groups the capability to really affect civil aviation. And I think that this is something that Israel should develop an answer to. As I understand, in the future, Poland might face all kind of militias as well, such as the Ukrainians face them in Ukraine, for example. You can face them. This is
and across the border, of course, the sort of imposing by some small hybrid warfare capabilities, of course, without restoring to the full-fledged war. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. The idea of using proxy is not new to the Russians.
Yeah.
And the last implication is the future of aircraft. For many years, the air power had the upper hand over the air defense. I think that the changes in air defense these days might end in a situation in which I don't know whether the air defense will have the upper hand, but the air power, and mainly manned air power, will be very
will subside. Yeah, will
many of its capability, it will lose much of its capabilities. It will need to stand long range, little air defense that can detect it easily, the aircraft easily. I think that what we see these days, or at least until the war in Ukraine, that aircraft could operate everywhere, almost everywhere that was needed. This situation might change. And the solution is very complex, and many changes should be done. The capability to find and destroy air defense, maybe the use of many cheap unmanned air systems standing over the battlefield that can, maybe the air defense can shoot down some of them, but not all of them. And if you buy many that can be effective, you'll be able to operate, but it's not manned aircraft. The use of cyber, use of electronic warfare. If the other side use networks, cyber is a very good answer. It has its own problems, but if it is working, it's very effective. And finally, I think that what the Americans had in mind for many years, the idea of suppression of enemy air defense, the idea that you don't need to destroy the assets on the other side, but only get limited air superiority for a limited time, is something that is not enough in the future. Because if the air defense assets will survive for a long period of time, conquering the sky every time from the beginning for a short period of time will be very expensive. It is much better to develop the capability to find and destroy the assets on the other side.
So that means that the ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles might be the answer, or hypersonic.
But it's very expensive. You can't do support for ground forces with hypersonic.
Yeah, close combat support not, but maybe critical network systems, knocking them out.
Strategic attack will be like you say, but a lot of attacks you can't do it like this.
Yeah, just for example, just a quick question for you, practical question to demonstrate. For example, if it occurred that the Americans gave the A-10s, Warthogs, to Ukrainians now, do you think that in particular scenarios, this plane would be survivable and of any help to the ground forces in close combat support?
My intuition is it's a very good plane for Ukraine in the war that is going now. Maybe they have some losses, but it's a classic plane for this war that was created in the South. Okay. Because it's an attrition war, nothing moves very much. And it's a classic airplane for these missions. It will be falling any one of 100 sorties, 1 to 200 sorties, maybe, but it's great plan for this one, for this war.
I understand.
Well, I'll try to pull down some takeaways in the last couple of minutes that we have. First, I believe that the changes in air defense are going to be dramatic. These are not small steps that you can overcome easily with some changes in the aircraft or in the electronic warfare suit or in the radars, because there are changes both in doctrine and in technology, not in the specific components of technology, but the idea of how air defense is being built up. I think that the question of freedom of flight becomes very crucial, both in routine, in low intensity conflict, and in high intensity conflicts. I believe that the main problem will be routine in Israel. The question of freedom of flight, and maybe the main changes should be taken in this perspective. I don't know what it means to Poland. So I don't have a good answer right now. And finally, the changes or tremendous changes in air defense capabilities, I believe they will force the air forces to be different. You'll be less able to count on manned aircrafts to get into the battlefield and operate. And this capability will be deprived for a much longer time during the beginning of war, if you'll ever be able to get air superiority for manned aircrafts. It means that you will need other components that maybe these days are only small parts of air forces, which means the long-range strike abilities or UAVs, etc. I believe that they'll have a bigger share in the future in air forces, and not what we see now. The air forces are built mainly on manned aircrafts. Well, that's for this presentation. You asked some very good question about air defense from the blue point of view. I think it will be very interesting to talk about it in the future, because it's not the same mirror.
Yeah. Thank you, Assaf, for this presentation. Thank you, Omer. That was great. Again, once we switched off the recording, I promised my audience to convince you and persuade you again to record another one. And why don't we speculate about how the future Air Force should be structured, both in terms of the offensive and defensive assets. Why not? Let's maybe focus on that in the future. For the time being, thank you, gentlemen, very much. Assaf Heller, Omer Dank from Tel Aviv, from Israel. Jacek Bartosiak, Strategy and Future. You stay with us for more episodes to come. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jacek.